Some of the more observant among you may have noticed that I'm collaborating with my old friend Bad Lighting. In my last video I mentioned that I wanted to make a full length, long list video of all of the things that I didn't like about Stephen Moffat and Sherlock, but that I didn't because H-Bomb beat me to it. But you know what he hasn't done a comprehensive takedown of and beaten me to? J.K. Rowling. I've seen people make videos outlining why they dislike specific stuff that she's done, and maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. Maybe I need to scour YouTube more thoroughly. But I've never seen a full video outlining the broader problems with her and her attitudes towards writing and people and life. Credit where it's due, I want to give her some genuine praise first, some sincere praise. I genuinely respect her sort of rags to riches story, how she was nobody and then she rose to fame and became a writer. I genuinely appreciate that, especially as a writer who wants to become popular. I went on a J.K. Rowling Harry Potter walking tour of Edinburgh, and seeing all the dinky little places where she used to go to write and where she used to hang out and where she got her inspiration was truly interesting and cool and humbling. It's also really cool how businesses like the Elephant Cafe and the Balmoral Hotel have capitalised on the fact that she used to be poor to make loads of money. Why not just use her name and brand and her rags to riches story to blow up financially? I was going to include a little bit here about how I respect her for losing her billionaire status by voluntarily giving so much of her money to charity, but then I remembered that she went from having $1 billion to having just shy of $1 billion. The money she gave to charity is actually very good and respectable, but I'm still right. That was my praise for Rowling. You might have missed it, it was brief. I never thought her writing was all that good. I only first read it right as the first Fantastic Beasts film was being announced. I only read and watched them in about 2015, but when I read them then I didn't think her writing was that good. And now, with years of experience and a first-class honours degree in knowing how to write well and knowing how to recognise good writing at my poor little hooves, I think her writing is even less good now, and that's with a more critical eye. The books are good, don't get me wrong, I enjoy them and I am a Harry Potter fan, but I find them good more in spite of her than because of her, if that makes sense. I enjoy them mostly by virtue of the world that she has created and the characters that she's created, rather than how she writes them, because I don't think that how she writes them is good. So my opinion of Harry Potter as stories and as books and as films and as a franchise has always been completely divorced from my personal opinion of J.K. Rowling or any of her opinions or beliefs. I'm very much somebody who finds it easy to disconnect an artist from their art. I can very easily enjoy content created by somebody who has beliefs and opinions that I find offensive, if those offensive, opinions aren't glaringly obvious in the content itself. But I never even really had to do that with J.K. Rowling, because I never associated her with the stories at all to begin with, and I guess that's probably why I find it so easy to see her as a person completely separate from the stories, because I never considered them in relation to one another. I've especially never really associated her with the films, even though she was involved in them, and they are better than the books, by the way. But the more stuff that she, says and does, and the more Harry Potter content that she's directly involved with, and the more apparent her opinions and beliefs become in the content that she's putting out, the harder it is to enjoy. My favourite example of this is how she loves to write metaphors for oppression and oppressed groups, but doesn't actually like putting oppressed minority groups in her fiction, in her content. To be clear, allegories and metaphors are fine, especially in kids' books, because they're a very appropriate and approachable way for a kid to read about real issues, and at the end of the day they are children's books and they are family films. But the more content she comes out with, the more evident it is that these allegories are at the expense of representing real oppressed groups. The house elves represent slavery so blatantly that Hermione starts spew as if she's making strides in abolishing the slave trade. There's the really direct mudblood thing, which I'm not a fan of. Fantastic Beasts has this whole thing about how muggles and wizards can't get married to each other, but she decided to set it specifically in 1920s New York, where people of different racial groups were legitimately, in real life, prohibited prohibited from marrying each other. And instead of looking like this, which is what it was like in real life and history, she had it look like a fucking mayonnaise orchard. It's all well and good to write about fake slavery. It's all well and good to write about elf slavery. But maybe include some actual black people, Joanne. Hermione in The Cursed Child being played by a black woman was a good choice, and I'll give her that, but that's more something that Rowling permitted rather than decided. And then there was that thing she said about how she'd always intended for Hermione to be ethnically ambiguous. No, she wasn't. Stop it. That's just an obvious and bad lie. Speaking of characters that she's always intended to look a certain way, apparently, let's talk about Lavender. The first few films, Lavender was a background character without any speaking lines, I'm pretty sure, and she was played exclusively by various girls of colour, because there was not a physical description of her in the books yet. But then the books revealed that she was white, and J.K. Rowling insisted like a baby that they had to make her match the book description, even though I can think of probably at least a dozen characters in the films whose appearances do not match how they're described in the books. It was fine when she was a girl of colour, when she was a background character with no lines, but now that she's significant and says things and has an actual role, fidelity to the source material is the most fucking goddamn important thing in the entire franchise. We have to maintain book fidelity. Since when? Oh, since when have you cared about that? I'm not being stupid, right? If she has always seen Lavender as a white character, always since her inception, if she has always seen Lavender as white, if she needs the physical attributes of the characters in the films to match the ones that she described in the book, and if she has creative control over almost every element of the films, including the casting, then why was Lavender played by girls of colour at all in the first few films? Why retroactively whitewash a film series that is already more diverse than your books? Your racism is showing, Joanne. Gay Dumbledore. That's how to transition into a new topic, right? People have discussed this already to no end, so I'm gonna try and keep it brief. But I think it's pretty apparent that Dumbledore just is not gay. In order for Dumbledore to be gay, J.K. Rowling would have to establish that he is gay within the canon of the Harry Potter universe, and that's not going to happen. I can say that with some confidence. She quite recently announced that the upcoming prequel film, which centres around the character who is widely speculated to be Dumbledore's gay love interest from the books, in a film which is going to heavily feature Dumbledore as a character, is going to make no reference whatsoever of the fact that he is gay. She went out of her way to announce that. She thought that was a good idea. We get it, you're a staunch Christian woman who just wanted to write fun stories about wizards. You don't have to pretend to give a shit about gay people for liberal brownie points from your fan base if you don't intend to demonstrate that anywhere, ever, at any point in time. We need to collectively, as a fan base, unaccept Dumbledore as gay and start going back to the idea that he's a straight character, because she plans to never establish him as gay, ever in her entire career. During the production of one of the films, they wrote in a little bit about some backstory about Dumbledore, about an old lost love of his, but this was before Rowling had lied about Dumbledore being gay, and so they didn't know that it was meant to be a man, and so they wrote it as a female love interest. And instead of changing the pronouns from she to he, or telling the script writers to change the pronouns from she to he, she just crossed out the entire fucking page and wrote, Dumbledore is gay! Because fuck gays, they don't get to have love interests, especially not in my fantasy wizard fiction. So that's the G community fucked, but if you are L, B, T, Q, or any of the others, don't worry, she never even mentions you at all. Unless you're straight, she might not even know the human word for what you are. Okay, you get it by this point. She loves to say that she respects minorities and then disprove it in every piece of content that she's created. But how do you resolve something like that? If you as an author have put yourself into that sort of corner, if you've garnered that sort of a reputation for yourself, how do you remedy that? Well, if you're J.K. Rowling, Nagini used to be an Asian woman. I noticed you wanted a minority character in a significant role that isn't shitty and sidelined. You wanted me to prove that people of colour matter and that I actually care. So I pulled this directly out of my arse. You thought that white character from the books and films was just being cruel to his pet snake? Not quite. He was actually committing acts of cruelty against his, what is essentially an Asian slave woman who he has had captured for decades of life, for decades of time, within the canon of these stories. You know when they released Princess and the Frog, and everyone initially was like, oh, that's really cool, they've got a black princess. And then slowly people started going, oh, you've introduced a black princess, but you've got away with not showing her by making a frog for almost all of the film. It's like that, except it's like if they released The Princess and the Frog and she was a frog for the entire film, and then years later they released a prequel film where they were like, hey, by the way, she used to be a black woman. Cheers for robbing the original of diversity that it never even had to begin with, I guess. You're a paragon of diversity and liberalism? How long have you been holding that Nagini secret? Only for around 20 years. I know you want us to think that you were progressive years and years before we wanted or expected you to be progressive, but we see through it. Stop it! And this is ignoring the really racially insensitive connotations of this twist. Are we to infer that she spent decades at the beck and call of Voldemort just to be unceremoniously decapitated by a teenager? That's my favourite type of positive representation, that is. That's enough of people that she apparently respects in real life but refuses to respect in her fiction. Time for people that she respects in her fiction but then apparently refuses to respect in her real life. That's a twist, isn't it? It goes the other way as well. The Harry Potter franchise has abuse, and specifically overcoming abuse, as potentially its central theme, the main theme of the franchise. She wrote a series of books revolving around the theme of overcoming abuse. She tackled the surprisingly mature theme of how conflicting and difficult it can be to experience abuse at the hands of your loved ones and family. She spent millions of dollars of her money setting up relief shelters for victims of domestic violence. She advocated for and publicly supported the Me Too movement. And then she decided to cast and defend the casting of a high-profile abuser. All of the stuff she did for domestic abuse victims, by the way, is good, and I will not knock her for it. All of the money and time and effort that she's put into those things is constructive and good and positive. But then she's turned around and gone, I love and respect victims of abuse. That's why, for my new movie, I have hired this man who provably abused his wife on camera. Plus, I know most fans consider Grindelwald to be gay. I know most fans speculate that he's the man that Dumbledore is gay with. So to add insult to injury, we've made the choice to hire this guy who beat the shit out of his wife in a provable way, partly because he didn't like that she was bisexual. Either she genuinely doesn't respect abuse victims, or her respect for them is secondary to putting a rich and famous abuser in her film to make as much money as she can and to profit off of his fame. Both of those things are bad, by the way. There isn't a better one. Like, okay, Johnny Depp was good in Edward Scissorhands and only the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, and Chocolat at a push, maybe, and nothing else in his entire career. But this is indefensible and basically renders null everything that she has ever done for abuse victims. You might not think it's that bad, you might not think it deconstructs everything she's ever done to quite that degree, but I do. I think it's indefensible, I think it's disingenuous, I think it's the worst thing that she possibly could have done in this situation. And my least favourite thing about this is that I want more Harry Potter content. I want Fantastic Beasts films. I want a film about the fucking Marauders. I consider myself to be a Harry Potter fan, but the problem is that the one Fantastic Beasts film we do have is bad. The next one that's about to come out is definitely going to be a lot worse. The Harry Potter books and films are tainted all over by her greasy fucking racism. There's this really obvious thread of homophobia that runs through all of the content, and the more she produces, the more she writes, because she's writing these fucking Fantastic Beasts films herself. She is the sole screenwriting credit for the first film. The more blatantly and frequently that her iffy and offensive values and opinions become really obvious in the films and books that she's producing, the harder it is to enjoy. And it's not even that I really love the originals, but the stuff that's coming out now is bad. It's not like the Jurassic Park franchise where the originals hold up to scrutiny and are genuinely very fucking good, but just the new stuff coming out is crap. It's not just the new shit, and it is shit. It makes the originals tougher to read and watch. She honestly just needs to pass the franchise off to somebody else, to be honest. I would suggest J.J. Abrams Abrams because he did a pretty good job with Star Trek and Star Wars. I'm not quite sure how he would handle the Harry Potter universe. Patty Jenkins would be good. And speaking of Patty Jenkins, watch Wonder Woman.